My name is CJ. Thank you for coming to the Unity User Group talk. Our presenter today is Spencer, who will talk to you about FMOD in Unity. But before he begins, I just want to say a couple things. First of all, I want to thank the Indies Workshop. That's the space that we're using, and thank IGDA because they help us out a lot. Yep.
Hello, everybody. My name is Spencer. I am a independent composer and sound designer for games. I'm right now working on a game called Charlotte Seeker. It is a bullet heck being made by Bear Cowboy Games. I'm going to stand here in the darkness and tell you about... Yes. You know, can y'all even see me? I'm going to sit down for this because I can't even... It doesn't matter. So I've got my notes on my phone and I've got the presentation on the Surface, so if I forget to advance a slide, just let me know. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about why Unity and FMOD are BFFs. Now, BFF is a technical term, don't worry though, it's not going to be too many of those. It's going to be pretty light. So I'm going to talk about why you might want to use FMOD or other audio middleware in the first place. I'm going to talk about what adding FMOD to your project can do for your pipeline. I'm going to go over the steps for how to integrate it pretty quickly. I'm going to talk about scripting, and I will give you some examples of some of the things that FMOD can do. So, the problem with game audio, he said very authoritatively. So the game audio pipeline traditionally is pretty awful. So I want you to all imagine a world in which writing is a fairly rare skill. So you're working with a writer on a game, and imagine that every single time they want to edit the text, they have to send you an email explaining which word on which line they want you to change. And imagine if they want something like center text or underline or bold, you have to code that feature from scratch, and then you become the only person who knows how to implement it. And now imagine that every single time you make an edit to the text, you have to build your entire game and send it to your writer, because they're the only ones who know how to make sure that it's working correctly. If any of that sounded familiar to you, you've probably been part of the game audio pipeline at some point in your life. So part of why this arises is that there are some communication troubles. There's not a huge amount of common language between game audio and game development. Game engine features tend to be pretty Spartan when it comes to game audio, at least compared to what we have in graphics. Middleware has been a thing for a little while now, but until quite recently it's been inaccessible. It's been difficult to integrate, and it's been expensive. So what this all adds up to is that sound designers working on your game don't feel empowered, and they don't use their full tool set. They might assume that some of the things that they want to do aren't possible. FMOD and other middleware are doing a lot to elevate the quality of game audio, and especially in the indie space, because FMOD looks a lot like software that audio people are used to using. So it feels familiar instantly. It has a lot of features that audio people like using in their linear audio software. It has a dedicated plugin for integration with Unity, and that's one of the biggest reasons why. Before, you'd have to write your own, and it was pretty ugly and pretty difficult to use. Also important, it's probably free. It depends on whether you meet certain criteria, such as only publishing one game with it a year and certain budgetary constraints, but it is most likely free for you to use. However, if it is not free for you to use, Wise might actually be a cheaper option. And although it is affordable and friendly, do not be fooled, FMOD is a professional tool. It is used by professionals in all sectors of the game industry, including AAA. Next slide on my notes, please. So I'm going to run over quickly some of the features that FMOD has. It works on every platform you can think of. It has extensive mixing and routing capabilities, extensive tools for nonlinear and adaptive music. It has several digital signal processing type effects built in, including spatialization, compression, ducking, filters, limiters, and the ability to import VSTs. It has a sandbox and a profiler, which make it really easy to test your FMOD project before you're able to implement it into the game. And once you have integrated your FMOD project and your Unity project, you can run them side by side and actually tweak the FMOD project while the game is running. Now, for those of us who have endured the endless cycle of test and build while making minor tweaks to the mix, that one I know is a godsend. Some drawbacks to FMOD, it's a little beta. It's still missing some of the features that were present in early versions of FMOD, such as FMOD Designer. And we've also had some performance issues on Charlotte Secret that we're still trying to track down. The scripting is a bear. There isn't really a way of grasping FMOD scripting intuitively. You just kind of have to keep a reference to the things that you want to do. And it is not quite as hands-off as using default Unity audio. In exchange for some powerful features, you have to do a little more hand-holding and management. So, basics of the FMOD interface. The most basic element in FMOD is the event. You create events generally by dragging a sound file onto the events pane. In FMOD, events are how sounds get played. They can be very simple, consisting only of a sound and a play command. They can also be very complex, with multiple sounds simultaneously, parameters, effects, logic structures, randomizers, and so on. The level above events is banks. Banks are how you group your sounds together and decide how to treat each of them. So you can see, for instance, I have a bank here called Charlotte, and when I click on it, I have selected that for the desktop version it's going to be a Vorbis of about 60% quality, and on Xbox One it's going to be XMA. So instead of going through and tediously rendering all of your sound files to match the format that they should be for each platform, and for what type of sound they are, you do that by grouping them into banks. And when you build your banks, they are converted to that format for you. And this is especially important because for sounds that are non-performance intensive, it can be nice to have those in a compressed format so they don't take up much of your RAM. However, if you are doing something which is performance intensive, such as interactive music, it's nice to have them in a computationally cheap format like WAV or PCM. I'm not going to talk a ton about mixing today, but I will show you guys what the mixer looks like really quickly. It's really, really easy to take your events and combine them into mixing groups. So this is a snapshot from the mixer on Charlotte Seeker. I have mixing groups for all the enemy attacks, all the enemy deaths, all the enemy ambiances, and then those all go into a subgroup called enemies. So once I had those balanced relative to each other, I can really, really easily turn all the enemies up or down. Now, in Unity 5, this is slightly easier to do, but in Unity 4, this would have been a nightmare. In fact, when we were still using Unity 4 on Charlotte Seeker, the way that I did this was with a giant spreadsheet. And it worked okay, but it was not fun. I'm going to go quickly over the steps for integrating FMOD into your Unity project. If you're doing this on your own, you'll probably be referencing their handy guide, which is on fmod.org. But I'm going to quickly go over the steps just to show you how easy it is. So on the FMOD side, you're going to create or open an FMOD project. You will have to create at least one event in it, assign it to a bank, save project, and build. And then make note of where your FMOD project is building its banks. On the Unity side, you will create or open a Unity project. You will import the FMOD integration package, which works just like any other Unity plugin. You'll, in that Unity plugin, there is a script called fmod_listener. You will attach that to the main camera. And then once you've done all these things, on the menu bar, there will be a new menu called FMOD. And when you click on that, you have the option to import banks. That'll give you a pop-up where you find the folder where FMOD has stored your banks. That is usually in project and then project name and then build. Once you have done this, whenever you make a change to your FMOD banks, whenever you tweak an event or change how your banks are working and then rebuild them, you'll just have to go to FMOD refresh events list in Unity so it gets an updated version of your banks. So now I'm going to give you guys some examples of some of the things that are possible in FMOD. So let's see. So let's say, for instance, I'm working on a game with planes, and I have the sound of bullets hitting metal. Not bad, not amazing.
Could everyone hear that okay? Should I turn it up? Turn it up.
Yeah. Well, it should be louder, right? So the human ear is really, really good at picking out when it's hearing the same sound over and over again, right? If every single time one of your bullets in this plane game hit metal, it made that exact sound, it would be really off-putting. So one very common sound designer trick is we have 3 variations on that same sound. I will multi-select them and drag them all here onto the audio 1 timeline, and it automatically creates a multi-sound for me. It's got one object that contains all 3 of those sounds. This glowing dice here means that it is randomizing them for me. And now when I hit play, I've got 3 different versions of it, which makes it sound much more naturalistic. But the ear will still eventually pick up on the fact that it's hearing the same sounds, even if there's more than one of them. So over on my pitch wheel here, I can right-click and click Add Modulation. And go over to Random, and a new knob appears. If I drag that knob up to, I found about 4.3 works just fine. Now not only am I randomizing which version of the sound, but I'm also randomizing the pitch. So those 2 things together help make a much more natural result. Now let's say the developer has come to me and said, I don't want just the clacky sound of the bullets hitting wings. I also want to hear the bullets ricochet. That's a good idea. I'll have an additional audio track. See, it would be possible to go through and change the script so that I have 2 events calling at the same time, but I can save a little minor headache by just making this same sound part of the original event. So I go and I multi-select all my different versions of all the ricochet sounds, and I'm going to go ahead and randomize the pitch on those as well by, again, right-clicking, Add Modulation and Random, drag this up a little higher than the other one, and then... But, in my opinion, having the ricochet sound every single time kind of takes away from the power of it. So, I'm going to click on my multi-sound here, where the ricochet sounds are, and then I will click on Trigger Behaviors. And then I'm going to click on this dice here, drag the probability down to about 20, and now it'll only happen about 24% of the time. Come on, give me one. There we go. So, yes, much nicer result. And I was able to do all of this without having to interfere with the code whatsoever. And I know that it'll work right out of the box with a simple play call. Let's see. This plane is also going to need an engine. So I drag my engine sound into the events pane, and it makes an engine event for me. And that's not a bad engine sound. But if it played like that, the player might feel a little gypped because the engine just sort of started and then stopped and didn't do anything. So we're going to start by right-clicking here on this blank area of the timeline, which gives us a number of options. And one of those is to add a loop region. And if I drag this out, I'm not going to use quite the beginning and the end of this file because I found that it makes some weird results, but... a little closer to how engines actually sound. I need to work on this asset a little bit. It's a little chintzy, but yeah, it's better. But engines also do more than just play forever and ever and ever, right? They can get faster and they can get slower. So I have my pitch wheel here again, right? Do fun things with that. But instead of randomizing it, I'm going to connect it to a parameter. So the first step is going to be to create a parameter. I click on this plus sign here. I have the option to add parameter. And I'm going to call this parameter, backspace, I'm going to call it speed. I've never used a surface before. And then I'm going to go over to my pitch wheel, and instead of clicking add modulation, I'm going to click add automation. Now, audio people, this track is going to look pretty familiar to you, but what automation is a way to, in audio software, control these knobs without doing anything, using a timeline, right? So instead of using the timeline to control the pitch wheel, I'm going to use our speed parameter. And I'm going to say, well, if it's all the way at the bottom, then right, if speed is at the lowest it can possibly be, well then the speed of the engine should be at the lowest it can possibly be. That sounds kind of like a plain engine idling. And then when it picks up, when they start the engine, they change the interface on me. well then it should kind of speed up pretty sharply. So we're going to make a nice sharp curve for that. And let's say that it sort of picks up at a steady rate until about here when it plateaus, and then if they really choose to gun the engine, well then we really give it to them. So let's see what that sounds like. So in our theoretical plane game, we're starting off with 0 speed, then they kick the engine on. And then it stays pretty much the same for a while, and then if they really gun it, yeah, and there are some things we can do to make that glide a little more smoothly, but you get the idea. So let's say the developer comes to us and says, this game is no longer about biplanes, it's now about Star Wars. Okay, that's fine. And let's say for some reason that this Star Wars game has a really minuscule budget and the only audio that we have to work with is from the original movie. So we have the Darth Vader theme. So it's fantastic, obviously, but one of the problems with the Darth Vader theme as it is that it's linear, and the game is non-linear. We don't know when Darth Vader is going to come in. We can use this beginning here to set the anticipation for the fact that Darth Vader is going to come into the room. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen. So what we're going to do is set up a scenario where this beginning part loops until Darth Vader actually enters the room, right? That'll be the result. So the first thing we have to do is give FMOD a little information. We're going to click on this, right-click on this blank area of the timeline again, and click Add Tempo Marker, so that we can tell FMOD what is the tempo of the Darth Vader theme. I happen to know that it is 102 beats per minute. Now, obviously, if I was doing this and I wasn't doing a live demo, I would take a little more time to tweak and get it as right as I can. But since y'all don't have all day, we're going to add a loop region. And you can see now that FMOD knows this is a piece of music, it is quantizing my interface here pretty hard, which is nice. So we're going to drag it from here to there, and let's see how that sounds. Oh, here comes the Darth Vader theme, except, no it didn't. Cool. Right, because Darth Vader's not here. So let's add a marker here. This marker is going to be called Shift Darths here. And we're going to add a parameter, right, called Darthness. And yes, join it. And that'll be how we tell FMOD. That'll be how we tell FMOD when Darth Vader's in the room. So right now, this is just going to loop forever. And that's not exactly the result that we want. We want a way of escaping this loop. So we're going to create something that we haven't seen here yet before. We're going to add a transition region. Aha, very fun. And you can see when I right-click to add transition region, Darths here was already an option for the destination of the transition region. Very nice. I'm going to drag this to equal the length of the loop here. And then the last thing I have to do is tell it how to behave. So I click on my transition region, and then I have to, right here where it says add trigger conditions, I can click on this plus sign, add parameter conditions, and there's my parameter right there, Darthness. So I'm going to say if the Darthness is above 0.5, that'll be the trigger. Now, right now, the way this is, it will work, but it will move the playhead directly from wherever it is in this transition region straight to the marker as soon as that parameter gets above 0.5. Now, and that's not exactly very musical. It kind of negates the point of going through this whole exercise, but thankfully we can quantize it. If I click here on this bars, notes here, I can tell it quantize every eighth note, quarter note, dotted, quarter, quarter, and every 1 bar. I'm going to go with every 1 bar. So let's see. Let's let it loop again. We'll start it here in the middle. We're waiting for Darth Vader to come in. Uh-oh. What's happening here? Seems like Darth Vader might be on his way. Oh, he's totally here, guys. Yes! Yes! So now, as sort of a final nice little touch, we're going to have a way, like let's say Darth Vader comes in, he looks around, and he's like, I'm not dealing with this today. I'm going to peace out. So, add marker. Yes. Okay, he'll anger out. All right, we're going to call it Darth's gone, guys. And so now we're going to create another transition region, and this time, instead of sending it to Darth's here, we're going to send it to Darth's gone, guys. We're going to make that a little longer than the other one. We're going to do the same steps again, except a little differently. We're going to click on Add Parameter Condition, Darkness again. We're going to make that from 0.49 down, and we're going to quantize it to, let's say, every 2 bars. So now, uh-oh, Darth left. So as you can see, we fairly easily and in very little time turned a completely linear piece of music into a non-linear piece of music, which is ready to be used in a very, very specific type of game. It's one scene where Darth Vader's entering and leaving a room, but hey. So now I'm going to talk quickly about some scripting. So, right, so scripting in FMOD is a little confusing. It's not very specific, but there are some generalities that I can talk about. The first thing to grasp is that, I should have added a bullet point for this, but the first thing to grasp is that events, like the ones that we created, the Darth Vader event, for instance, it's kind of like a blueprint. It's not a singular thing. You can make 100 of those, and each one of them is unique. They're all objects, basically. Each one of them is unique. They've all got their own functions. They've all got their own parameters that belong specifically to them, and it's really important to grasp that. So the other thing is to know that when the game loads, the FMOD plugin creates an object called FMOD Studio System. FMOD Studio System is how you access all of the things that you've created. It's FMOD loading the master bank and creating a reference to all the events that you created. Now, when we hear, oh, FMOD on start loads the master bank, that can be a little bit scary. It's like, what are you trying to do to all my RAM? But the master bank, as far as Unity is concerned, is just a list of strings. Unless you tell it to preload samples in a specific bank, it's not going to load a single audio file until it's needed. So that's actually pretty nice. So FMOD Studio System, it also has a couple of functions like get event and play one shot, and these relate to its role as sort of a liaison between the scripts and the banks. We've also got an object called FMOD.Studio. FMOD.Studio is how you access FMOD's variable types, its data types, its specific things that it can create. And it's also got a couple of functions, mostly for converting between data types. There are 2 main methods of playback that I'm calling the event method and the one-shot method that I'm going to talk about now. Okay, so the event method of playback is a 5-step process. The first step is to declare a type of event instance. So up at the top I have fmod.studio.event_instance myEvent. That variable myEvent is now an event instance, but it is not assigned. Step 2 is to assign. Notice I'm doing this in start. You can do this anywhere in runtime, but most of the time you're doing it in start. I'm taking the event that I declared and I am assigning it by using fmod.studiosystem.instance.getEvent. And then in here I have a path name. Path names you get by right-clicking on the event name in the FMOD window, but a path name is just, it's just what FMOD has named your event. So then in update, I have myEvent.start, that tells the event to start playing, and I've also got myEvent.stop. Not all events are going to have to get stopped. The musical one that we just created probably would have to get stopped because it's very long and because sections of it loop. But the plain game event with the bullets, we might not have to stop it because it's real short. The last thing that I show here, step number 5, is event.release. And you notice I also have a stop above it because that's just generally a good practice to stop something before you release it, because you can make certain decisions about how the sound stops by passing it an argument of the type stop mode. So the last thing I have to do is release the sound. Now, putting an audio source on a game object in Unity has certain advantages. Like Unity knows when you're not using that audio source anymore because you destroy the object. FMOD doesn't have access to that kind of knowledge, so you have to tell it when you're done using an event, you have to release it. Otherwise, you probably will end up creating a lot more events than you're actually using, and that's when you're going to run into problems with your RAM. Also part of the event method is spatializing. Now the reason that spatializing has its own page here is because you can see that this line of code is a little bit of a bear. The way to spatialize is to use a function which is a member function of event instance, which is called set3dattributes. Set3dattributes tells FMOD how to make the sound behave relative to where the listener is, so that things feel like they sound like they're in 3 dimensions. Of course, set3dattributes is part of the FMOD API, so it does not take transforms. It does not take vector 3s. It most certainly does not take game objects. So what you have to use is a function that FMOD was kind enough to give us called fmod.studio.unityutil.toThreedattributes, and then you can pass that a transform. And then I pass that as an argument to set3dattributes. So here I have it in update because I'm assuming that this object is moving constantly. However, if you have an object which you know is going to be in the same place forever, you can set 3D attributes on start. But you want to use this whenever an object moves. Parameters. Remember, we created those parameters for the engine and for the Darth Vader music event. Using parameters is a little bit tricky to grasp because, remember, each event instance is unique according to the game. They all have their own instance of the parameters. So what you first have to do is declare an event instance, assign an event instance, and then get that event instance's instance of the parameter. So I have declared my event, I declare a parameter instance. In start, I assign my event, and then I call a member function of event instance called getParameter. I give it the name of the parameter exactly as I typed it in the FMOD interface, and then out my event parameter. And then once that is started, I can use a member function of my event, or of a parameter instance called setValue. So every time I change this value, that value will change for the event as well, and we'll get the behavior that we were hoping for. If you are not using parameters, if your event is really short, if it needs to spatialize, and you know that you don't need to care about whether you stop it or start it or how to deal with the memory, then I recommend using Shot Playback. Shot Playback, we use it for almost all of the weapon sounds in Charlotte Seeker, mostly because they play very simply, they don't have anything like effects changing on them, and again, they're really short, and we don't have to worry about stopping them, we don't have to worry about running out of memory. fmod_studiosystem.instance.play1shot, and then the event path name, and then your position. If you're using it for anything that's longer than about 0.75 seconds on an object which is moving at the time, I don't recommend using this because it will spatialize the sound, but only to the position that the object was in when you call this function. So if you use it to play in ambience, for instance, it will work very poorly. Thank you all so much for having me. It has been a real pleasure. I have some helpful links, fmod.org/downloads, fmod.org/files/Unity documentation. I am at Spencer Riedel on Twitter and spencerriedel.com. Thank you all so very, very much. So then, if we can get the lights on and there are any questions. Absolutely take some questions. I just need some lights on for that. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. I'm talking about like once upon a time, someone used an MP3 for their ambience track. Woo! Yes, questions, Peter.
So you showed the whole FMOD Studio where you're setting up all the triggering systems and stuff. That looked like it was a standalone application.
Yes.
Does that compile down into something that you then have to import into Unity, or how does that work?
Good question. So the FMOD application, the FMOD Studio is a application by itself, and what it builds is the thing I was talking about earlier, those banks. Banks which encompass your sound files and the path names and the things that you've built. Banks then can be used by the FMOD Unity integration plugin. It accesses them and it knows how to work with them. Or if you're working with Unreal, I believe there's a plugin for that now as well. Or if you're really smart and you're using an engine that isn't either of those two things, you can write your own integration. The low-level API is all on fmod.org. Yes, sir.
You said during the presentation that FMOD was probably free.
Probably free, yeah.
Could you go into at least maybe a tiny bit more detail on that? Because
Sure.
I have my information with FMOD.
So yeah, I've had to talk about that a little bit. If you meet certain conditions, it's free for you to use. If you are under a certain budget for your project, and if you are only using it to publish one game a year, then FMOD's free. However, if you don't meet those conditions, often Wise is a cheaper option. Yes.
There's no revenue limitations.
I would have to look them up again. Yeah.
What if you don't make games?
If you don't make games, then you can totally download the studio. You can download FMOD Studio and use it for free. The software is totally free to download and play with. And yes.
So at the end you said about not using that command you showed to use for things that are moving. What would you use for things that are moving?
So if objects are moving and they have sounds that are fairly long, where spatialization is important, then I would use the event method, the 5-step method with those parameters that I talked about, and then include in that the function that spatializes those sounds. And if you have sounds that are not spatializing at all, treat them as events, and then in the editor you have the option to turn down spatialization. I'll talk a little tiny bit about spatialization. Spatialization in audio middleware and game engines, and Unity does this as well. It's just a series of real-time effects. One of them is volume roll-off. It logarithmically turns the volume down as an object gets further and further away from you. Personally, I don't really like logarithmic curves. They're realistic, but they make things too quiet. It'll also roll off certain frequency ranges. The further away you get from something, certain frequencies get turned down. Doppler, absolutely Doppler. I think we had a question from over here.
I was just going to ask, like, when you talk about the number of games, is that like the number of games and all the number of games that you're actually selling?
I'm not totally sure I understand.
Well, like, maybe when you're just making a bunch of free games,
Oh, I see.
I doubt that people are going to care, or...
I might have to look at them. Might have to look at it a little more closely. I think that is a hard limit. You publish one game a year with it, and if you're making a lot of games that are free, I think Unity 5 is probably fine. It's the big drawback to using just straight Unity with no FMOD, besides the lack of any kind of interactive music features, is that the mixing is really, really, really hard. But I think that Unity 5 has gotten some better mixing features. I just haven't had a chance to use them because as soon as Unity 5 came out, we moved to FMOD. Yeah, and yes.
We're in the middle of moving from Unity 4 Wasteland to FMOD. And one of the workflow questions or problems that I don't know that there's an easy answer to is that our audio designers would author the sounds, right? But then our level designers would be often the ones who set the ranges for the min and max distance on a given audio source, right?
Mm-hmm.
Based off what I see in FMOD Studio, those ranges are set in the studio, and the API doesn't have the ability to edit those away or to modify those.
Yeah. As far as I know, that is how it works.
If you can speak to it, are there any workarounds or recommendations that you've found?
The only one that I can think of is to prototype what you want those to be using default Unity audio, and then write those numbers down. That is a drawback. However, it can be not that much of a pain because you can run FMOD and Unity side by side. You can set them up so that all the parameters that you are changing in FMOD change the banks that are happening in Unity. Those changes will have to get rebuilt when you are done playing the game, but you can do so. You won't have the nice visual of where the volumes are, but you can change the parameters for how they're spatializing on specific events. Last I checked, you can also mass select and edit things. I wish that there were a nicer way to do that, but yes, you can. I believe you can mass select certain groups. And if you take things you want to have all edited the same way, I recommend putting all those events into the same folder. That's something that if this were like a true FMOD tutorial and not just a demonstration, I probably would have talked about creating event folders and also about mixing groups and things like that. Really good question. Do we see another one from? Yes. Okay. Then that's another one from you, sir.
Oh, I was going to say I could slightly speak to like I haven't used FMOD, but I
Okay.
had to like try to set up these files a little bit. And compared to what FMOD has, Unity's files are those kind of like FMOD bare bones. Like there's a lot more scripting that you have to do, there's a lot more setup that you have to do. You're not able to do interactive music as easily with Unity files compared to so.
Sounds about like Unity 4. And
Yeah.
so yeah, there are certain things I didn't talk about because they're still pretty easy to do in Unity 4. Like another common technique for interactive music is dynamic mixing, and it's pretty easy to picture what that is. You know, I have my drum track here, I have my bass track here. I play them at the same time, and I change the volume levels relative to each other, depending upon some game parameter. FMOD can do that really, really easily with parameters, but I didn't really feel the need to talk about it because even Unity 4 can actually do that pretty easily. Yeah, so are there any other questions? Awesome, thank you guys so very, very much. It has been a pleasure.